Sword of Atlas is a tactical role-playing game where the players take control of a party of travelers pitted against AI opponents, where fast-paced decision-making meets grid-based combat in a world where your actions determine the fate of your party. That's a lot of words to say. We are taking a turn meter action system, putting it on a grid, and playing it out in real time. Welcome back, everybody. This week we are talking to the narrative team. And we'll start off by having everybody introduce themselves. I think all of you are actually kind of sharing your efforts across strike teams. So maybe just introduce yourself and talk about what you're doing, narrative and otherwise.
I'm Joe. I'm working on narrative design and production for the project.
I'm Cody. I'm the lead level designer. In terms of narrative, I created the character Neff and just generally help implementing and iterating on a narrative.
Hi, it's me again. I work on narrative team. I also work on the systems team and as a level designer as well.
I'm Anne. I'm an artist and I created the character Greg Arias.
Let's maybe actually start there because that's actually what I was going to ask first, is kind of where all of the narrative began. So Anne, why don't you start off with that? Where did Greg originate from? What was the inspiration? Where did this all begin?
So actually, before I pitched this game, I had an idea for this character, Greg Arias, and I was going to do a whole game based around Greg Arias. And it was going to be called Bard to the Bone, working title. And
I think we should rebrand our game right now.
It's not too late.
Why didn't we make that game? That sounds great.
I already had the idea for the character for some time, and then when we started, on this game and talking about different classes and story elements we wanted to have, well, I was like, it sounds like there's room for a bard character. I wanted there to be a little bit of comedy in the game, because I felt like if it was too dark and serious all the time, it would kind of be a slog to get through. So I feel like Greg has been a touch of comedic relief, and he sort of eventually evolved into a much bigger part of the narrative than I think we had initially thought.
Even just watching narrative from afar, just the messages in Discord and all that, seems like you had characters that were being built and then almost separately a world they needed to be set within. So how did you manage doing that? Was the world building first, or did you just kind of evolve off of the characters? Maybe we'll start with Joe.
From the beginning, we wanted to make a character-driven story. But what I pitched is that we each come up with 2 or 3 characters, pitch them to each other, and we take the ones that we're most interested in that will fit the archetypes that the systems designers are coming up with. And we start with those characters and we start building a story around their personal journeys. And then we make the world to fit them, because we wanted the characters to be what stood out about it, because it's their story. That's what makes you interested in, especially games like RPGs. You just want to hear more about the characters you're with and figure out the world through them. And so we started with the characters. Once we had those set into stone, we then started working on kind of the overarching world and the narrative that they would take place in. And there was a little bit of I'll just say difficulty in making sure that all of it blended together. We didn't really get that in place until much further along than we would have hoped. It was only 2 or 3 months ago now that it all kind of fully came together, and we're like, okay, this is the world, this is the story, these are the characters, now we'll write the whole thing.
Does the narrative influence level design? It all starts with the character to the world and then to the level, or how do you approach kind of blending narrative and level?
Like Joe said, we started really character-centric, and one of the unique challenges from a narrative perspective is that we have so many writers, and we wanted every writer to own a character with a unique voice. And sometimes this kind of led to a writing by committee sort of thing, where I think that is part of why we struggled to create a cohesive world early on. And level design was actually one of the driving forces of hey, I need to build the levels, so give me some ideas for your character, but I'm just gonna start making stuff. So I early on, I just kind of started putting in a general a mini story within a level that I would try to incorporate some of the key character traits, and eventually our plot and world did catch up and has become more of a guiding structure. But early on, levels definitely helped to drive, like story out of necessity.
I think the narrator, which is now the sword, is kind of something that a few of us were attached to pretty strongly from the beginning. The idea of having this like talking, mysterious object that you pick up that is only talking to you and kind of guiding you through the story. That's something that I was pretty attached to coming out the gate. I know.
I mean, my recollection is like it was there from the very beginning. Like there were some different interpretations of the narrator, but I think it was always there.
If you think about the writing that each of you have done, or even the script as a whole, how would you describe the feeling the player can expect to have? Is there a tone overall that you were designing for?
I mean, I feel like each character really has their own distinct tone, and kind of appeals to different types of players who like different types of narrative. And I kind of think that was by design. My character, Neff, is actually kind of interesting because it's, as far as I recall, it's the only character in the game that I actually did not initially create the character. Earlier, Anne said that she wanted some levity, some humor in the game. I think maybe my characters were on the darker, more serious side. He was a character who almost spoke in riddles and poetry, and he was like very concerned with the order of things, and almost like OCD, but just like amped up to everything around him. So I kind of took that idea and ran with it, developed this character. He sees this order in the universe that nobody else around him can see, and he thinks that there are these divine pairings, and that kind of his language complements that with like he'll speak in a lot of like couplets and just rhymes to kind of reinforce that connection that he sees in the world.
I write for the character Shyla. She's our archer. When we were, I remember we were pitching ideas for this character and for all the characters. And my idea behind Shyla was, I was trying to think of, well, how could you make a rogue unique? The idea of this anxious rogue and trying to give her a voice that sounds all her own, not too generic without being overbearingly obnoxious. I'm hoping that she comes across as somebody that you can empathize with, somebody that you can have compassion for.
And let's hear some about Greg.
I guess he might be more of like a stereotypical RPG character than the others. He's like very kind of cocky, a little self-absorbed. I think in the name of comedy, mostly. I think like fundamentally, I imagine him being like a good person, but he does kind of have these like slightly more obnoxious character traits. So I think it was kind of interesting because like when we were originally developing the narrative, I was thinking about him as a character from like a very kind of like one-dimensional standpoint, and then like as we were adding these layers to the story and like having to like flesh out like backstories more, was like, oh well, now I guess he's like slightly more like tragic than I imagined him being. I don't want to like give away any spoilers or anything like that, obviously, but yeah, I think he has kind of become a lot more like fleshed out over time as opposed to like one-dimensional RPG bard character.
I actually ended up writing both the narrator and one of the companions, Richa. I tried to make Richa kind of that stalwart companion that you have from the beginning, who once you finish like her level, her little quest, she'll just kind of stand by your side and be like, I almost want to say like in comedy, she's like the straight man to the rest of the party. So everybody else is saying and doing these crazy things, and Richa will just be there like kind of the grounding rod for the rest of it. It was interesting to try to get that in there in as short a time period as possible, because she is the first mission in the game. And until pretty late on, we weren't even sure if she was going to be in the game. So we kind of had a very limited amount of space in order to develop that. The narrator, on the other hand, was a bit of a challenge because the tone that we settled on for the narrator from the get-go was more almost like begrudging or slightly antagonistic towards the player, especially at the beginning of the game. But as you grow and as your character gets stronger and you travel through the game, it changes from this mysterious, almost antagonistic character that is you're not sure if it's using you or you're using it or what the relationship there is. But as you travel and figure out more about the sword and its story, it switches from being this antagonistic character to almost like a begrudging mentor or a begrudging hero itself.
How do you write a full or even truncated narrative in such a short time with such a small scope?
I think the structure that we started, where we very early on identified what we wanted the story to be. We wanted it to focus on these characters. These are our 4 characters. These are the 4 levels. Now make them as impactful in a small time period as you can. And that is where most of the difficulty has arisen, because telling the story that you want to tell with the character in 2 pages of a script is not easy. Just the other day, we sat down as a writing team and read through the entire script. Like, okay, what works? What doesn't work? And we've been getting feedback about it throughout the entire time as well. Making sure our focus was on the characters was a good call. Doesn't mean it's made the process any easier, though.
I really agreed with Cody that level design has really honed our focus and made us be able to buckle down and say, this is the story we are going to tell with this character in this moment, and this is the constraint which we have to tell that story. Sometimes having those constraints makes you be able to do what you're supposed to do.
Thanks, you 4, for being here to talk to us about the narrative and how it's all evolved.
Thank you.
Thanks, Connor.
Thanks.